I remember that evening as if time carved it into my bones. I left the office early with a smile that felt too big for my face. After years of sacrifice, the company had finally recognized my work with a promotion I had not mentioned to anyone. I wanted my wife to be the first to know. I imagined her pride, her embrace, maybe even tears of joy. I stopped by the florist, chose her favorite lilies, and picked up her favorite dessert. Every detail had meaning. I wanted the night to feel special, the kind of moment couples talk about decades later. When I opened the door to our home, the silence was not the comforting kind. It was deliberate. No television, no music, no clatter in the kitchen. My footsteps sounded loud, as if the house had become a stage and I was walking into a scene already in progress. The candles I had placed earlier remained untouched. The aroma in the air was unfamiliar, dramatic, and expensive, nothing like the perfumes my wife usually wore. It felt like following a trail laid out for someone who was not me. I set the flowers down and walked toward the sound I eventually picked up on. It was faint, like whispers rehearsed behind a curtain. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a strange instinct telling me that something was waiting for me on the other side of silence. I climbed the stairs slowly, listening. My name did not appear in any conversation. Laughter floated in the air, but not the warm laughter I knew. It was polished, artificial, like someone performing joy rather than living it. The moment I pushed the bedroom door, reality snapped. It was not a private room anymore. It looked like a stage prepared for an announcement I had not been invited to witness. My wife stood in front of a mirror, wearing a white dress that was too elegant for any ordinary evening. Beside her was a man I had never seen. He was tall, muscular, and self-assured. A photographer moved around them as if capturing a moment that belonged to them alone. I froze, not from shock, but because my mind refused to assign meaning to what my eyes were seeing. My wife did not look surprised to see me. She barely acknowledged my presence. The stranger grinned, extended his arm toward her, and spoke with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. He referred to her as his future. He spoke as though I was not there, as though I was a delivery man interrupting a celebration. No one flinched. No one apologized. I was neither confronted nor explained to. I was dismissed. In that second, something inside me shifted. The man I was before that door opened had been emotional, hopeful, ready for family conversations. The man who stood there now became quiet and analytical. I noticed every detail others thought I would miss. The half-hidden ring box on the dresser, the printed schedule near the bed, the wine bottle waiting for a toast. None of it included me. My first instinct was not rage. It was clarity. Betrayal is loud for those who discover it, but it is silent for those who planned it. I saw no guilt in their eyes. They were not afraid of losing me. They believed I held no power, no options, no part in the life they had already imagined. That belief changed me more than their actions. I walked out without a word. The lilies remained on the table downstairs. The dessert melted untouched. My heart, however, did not break. It reorganized itself. There are moments when a man discovers who he really is. That night, I learned that arguments are for those who seek explanations. I was done seeking. I was ready to understand. And a man who understands stops reacting. He starts planning. The first time I spoke to him, I understood why my presence in that room felt inconvenient. He behaved as if he were the owner of a kingdom he had not built. He walked toward me with a smile that did not reach his eyes, extended his hand, and introduced himself with a voice that carried the confidence of someone who believed life owed him admiration. His handshake was firm, not out of respect, but to measure how easily he could dominate another man. He announced his profession, his monthly earnings, and the number of people he claimed to have working under him. It was not a conversation. It was a performance meant to diminish me. He laughed frequently, not because anything was amusing, but because laughter made his words feel like decrees. He considered himself a mentor in relationships, boasting about how some men wasted potential with women who failed to appreciate them. His idea of success had nothing to do with loyalty or effort. It revolved around taking something that belonged to someone else and pretending it was destiny. People around him nodded, impressed by his posture, his watch, and the illusion of power he carried like perfume. My existence was reduced to a background object, a placeholder in a space he believed he had already conquered. While he flooded the room with noise, I focused on silence. Experience teaches that truth rarely hides in words. It hides in reactions. When someone mentioned financial stability, his face twitched for a fraction of a second. It was subtle, but I saw it. The man who boasted about wealth avoided direct conversations involving responsibility. He shifted topics whenever long-term planning appeared. His confidence was not grounded. It was borrowed. My wife stood near him, her posture rigid, her eyes darting toward her phone every time it vibrated. That gesture was not the excitement of a woman in love. It was the nervousness of someone managing multiple realities. The device became a shield she held close, afraid that a single notification might break the story she was trying to live. She believed no one noticed, yet every movement had meaning. Betrayal never walks proudly. It hides behind habits. I observed the room with new eyes. A drawer, slightly open, revealed a ring box that was not from our wedding. It was different, modern, expensive. The kind chosen for proposals marked by spectacle rather than sincerity. On the bedside table lay a calendar with a date circled in red. It was not our anniversary, nor any holiday we celebrated. The mark felt ceremonial, an appointment for a new beginning that required my disappearance. The guests around them behaved as if they were accomplices to a secret. They avoided looking at me directly, as though acknowledging my presence would contaminate the fantasy. Their smiles were full of pity, the kind reserved for someone who does not understand the game being played. I understood more than they expected. Their silence spoke louder than their admiration for him. People often support what they envy and mock what they fail to comprehend. I knew then that this man had not simply seduced my wife. He had positioned himself as a solution to her insecurities. He presented himself as an upgrade, a version of life she believed she deserved. That narrative only works when someone feels undervalued. She did not fall in love. She fell into a story where she expected applause, not accountability. Standing there, invisible in my own house, I saw the truth clearly. This was not a relationship. It was a transaction wrapped in decoration. He was not her future. He was her escape. And escapes have expiration dates. That night, as I listened and watched, I realized something important. Betrayal is never sudden. It is constructed, one detail at a time, by people who believe consequences are optional. I was done overlooking clues. I did not confront them. I learned from them. Understanding transforms pain into direction. And now, I had direction. When I walked out of that room, the world did not collapse. It sharpened. I realized I had spent years giving explanations to someone who had already stopped listening. There was nothing left to discuss. Arguments change nothing when decisions have already been made in private. My silence became my first act of strategy. People who believe they are ahead rarely look behind them, and that arrogance became my advantage. I understood that truth does not need to be shouted. It only needs to be collected. The first thing I examined was her phone behavior. I waited until she slept and noticed an application hidden inside a folder she never used before. It was a messaging platform registered under an email that did not match any of her professional accounts. I did not open it immediately. I noted the details. Patterns matter more than emotions. Over the following days, I watched her switch screens quickly whenever I approached. Her laughter came at strange hours. Her calls became short and coded. Curiosity is a powerful teacher. It taught me exactly where to look. The financial clues appeared next. Our joint account showed transfers that did not make sense. The amounts were small enough to avoid suspicion, but frequent enough to raise questions. Each transaction went to an account belonging to a consulting service I had never heard of. I contacted my bank manager discreetly and requested a list of all registered financial movements associated with her personal profile. The report arrived a week later, and that document was the first door I pushed open. Hidden behind professional labels were payments to a man whose name I now recognized. They were not symbolic contributions. They were investments dressed as love. My wife believed I was too absorbed in my job to notice anything outside of it. She did not know that my work had taught me how people hide intentions inside numbers. Every expense leaves a fingerprint. I requested access to public records and discovered a rental property registered under her name. It was located across town, furnished, and fully paid for. The contract began months before that night. So while I believed we were building a future together, she was constructing an exit decorated as independence. I still did not confront her. Anger wastes opportunities. Instead, I equipped myself. I placed a small device under the dining table and another near her dressing mirror. I recorded conversations that revealed more than betrayal. I heard promises of shared assets, discussions about our belongings, and plans involving my absence. They referred to my life as a phase that needed to be erased. Their confidence was so inflated that they spoke openly, never imagining I had already entered their world without knocking. The more I listened, the more I understood something unsettling. My wife was not running toward love. She was escaping responsibility. The man she called her future was not a partner. He was a replacement constructed to justify abandoning me without guilt. He offered dreams, not stability. He fed her resentment against the marriage and dressed it as empowerment. She financed those dreams because she believed they would return her something better. She did not see that she was paying for illusions. I watched them from distance, not as a wounded husband, but as a researcher observing behavior. Loyalty cannot be stolen. It can only be redirected. She redirected hers toward a fantasy polished with compliments and promises. That discovery did not break me. It opened my eyes. I finally saw that love is not destroyed by betrayal. It dies when one person starts rehearsing a different life while pretending nothing has changed. The information I gathered became a map. It pointed not only to what they were doing, but why they were doing it. My wife was not trying to build a new chapter. She was attempting to erase me from her narrative while using my resources to design a brand new world where she could reinvent herself without acknowledging the cost. I did not plan revenge. I planned clarity. Understanding is more powerful than rage. And now, I understood everything. I had heard of betrayal happening behind closed doors, whispered, hidden, disguised in shadows. What I discovered was worse. Their betrayal was not secret. It was organized. While my marriage still existed legally, emotionally, and socially, another ceremony was being constructed in broad daylight, as if my presence had expired and all that remained was my signature. They did not ask for it. They assumed it would arrive, like a bill no one questions. The first proof came in the form of an envelope left carelessly inside her handbag. I had not gone through her things. It fell when she rushed out one morning and slid across the floor. When I picked it up, the world paused. The card was thick, embossed, and elegant. The font was romantic. My wife's name stood next to another man's, as if my existence had never been written into her story. The invitations were not drafts. They were printed, distributed. Some had already been mailed. I knew then that this man had not simply seduced my wife. He had positioned himself as a solution to her insecurities. He presented himself as an upgrade, a version of life she believed she deserved. That narrative only works when someone feels undervalued. She did not fall in love. She fell into a story where she expected applause, not accountability. Standing there, invisible in my own house, I saw the truth clearly. This was not a relationship. It was a transaction wrapped in decoration. He was not her future. He was her escape. And escapes have expiration dates. That night, as I listened and watched, I realized something important. Betrayal is never sudden. It is constructed, one detail at a time, by people who believe consequences are optional. I was done overlooking clues. I did not confront them. I learned from them. Understanding transforms pain into direction. And now, I had direction. When I walked out of that room, the world did not collapse. It sharpened. I realized I had spent years giving explanations to someone who had already stopped listening. There was nothing left to discuss. Arguments change nothing when decisions have already been made in private. My silence became my first act of strategy. People who believe they are ahead rarely look behind them, and that arrogance became my advantage. I understood that truth does not need to be shouted. It only needs to be collected. The first thing I examined was her phone behavior. I waited until she slept and noticed an application hidden inside a folder she never used before. It was a messaging platform registered under an email that did not match any of her professional accounts. I did not open it immediately. I noted the details. Patterns matter more than emotions. Over the following days, I watched her switch screens quickly whenever I approached. Her laughter came at strange hours. Her calls became short and coded. Curiosity is a powerful teacher. It taught me exactly where to look. The financial clues appeared next. Our joint account showed transfers that did not make sense. The amounts were small enough to avoid suspicion, but frequent enough to raise questions. Each transaction went to an account belonging to a consulting service I had never heard of. I contacted my bank manager discreetly and requested a list of all registered financial movements associated with her personal profile. The report arrived a week later, and that document was the first door I pushed open. Hidden behind professional labels were payments to a man whose name I now recognized. They were not symbolic contributions. They were investments dressed as love. My wife believed I was too absorbed in my job to notice anything outside of it. She did not know that my work had taught me how people hide intentions inside numbers. Every expense leaves a fingerprint. I requested access to public records and discovered a rental property registered under her name. It was located across town, furnished, and fully paid for. The contract began months before that night. So while I believed we were building a future together, she was constructing an exit decorated as independence. I still did not confront her. Anger wastes opportunities. Instead, I equipped myself. I placed a small device under the dining table and another near her dressing mirror. I recorded conversations that revealed more than betrayal. I heard promises of shared assets, discussions about our belongings, and plans involving my absence. They referred to my life as a phase that needed to be erased. Their confidence was so inflated that they spoke openly, never imagining I had already entered their world without knocking. The more I listened, the more I understood something unsettling. My wife was not running toward love. She was escaping responsibility. The man she called her future was not a partner. He was a replacement constructed to justify abandoning me without guilt. He offered dreams, not stability. He fed her resentment against the marriage and dressed it as empowerment. She financed those dreams because she believed they would return her something better. She did not see that she was paying for illusions. I watched them from distance, not as a wounded husband, but as a researcher observing behavior. Loyalty cannot be stolen. It can only be redirected. She redirected hers toward a fantasy polished with compliments and promises. That discovery did not break me. It opened my eyes. I finally saw that love is not destroyed by betrayal. It dies when one person starts rehearsing a different life while pretending nothing has changed. The information I gathered became a map. It pointed not only to what they were doing, but why they were doing it. My wife was not trying to build a new chapter. She was attempting to erase me from her narrative while using my resources to design a brand new world where she could reinvent herself without acknowledging the cost. I did not plan revenge. I planned clarity. Understanding is more powerful than rage. And now, I understood everything. I had heard of betrayal happening behind closed doors, whispered, hidden, disguised in shadows. What I discovered was worse. Their betrayal was not secret. It was organized. While my marriage still existed legally, emotionally, and socially, another ceremony was being constructed in broad daylight, as if my presence had expired and all that remained was my signature. They did not ask for it. They assumed it would arrive, like a bill no one questions. The first proof came in the form of an envelope left carelessly inside her handbag. I had not gone through her things. It fell when she rushed out one morning and slid across the floor. When I picked it up, the world paused. The card was thick, embossed, and elegant. The font was romantic. My wife's name stood next to another man's, as if my existence had never been written into her story. The invitations were not drafts. They were printed, distributed. Some had already been mailed. The date on the card matched the one marked on the calendar I had noticed earlier. It was a future carved without hesitation, without even the courtesy of deception. Weddings are supposed to symbolize beginnings. This one was a monument built upon my erasure. I stood there holding that card, not shaking, not angry, simply aware. Awareness is a strange feeling. It removes illusions faster than heartbreak. I wanted to understand how far this spectacle had progressed. I contacted the venue listed at the bottom of the invitation, pretending to be a guest confirming attendance. The woman on the phone spoke enthusiastically about the event, describing floral arrangements, seating capacity, and customized decor. She mentioned the bride had requested white orchids imported from South Africa and a live violin entrance. The level of detail stunned me. I had been replaced not emotionally, but administratively. Later that week, I drove past a boutique known for couture gowns. I entered without a plan and asked if a dress was being prepared under my wife's name. The attendant lit up, eager to discuss a client who had insisted on a unique design. She showed me a sketch, a fitted bodice, a dramatic train, and lace imported from Italy. The cost was enough to pay for a small apartment. Payment had already begun through installments that came from our shared funds. Every pillar of this wedding stood on something that belonged to me. My accounts, my security, my time, even the years I invested in building a life with her were now scaffolding for another man's celebration. She was not eloping. She was transferring ownership. Their confidence came from a belief I would crumble quietly, hand over my dignity, and disappear before their ceremony. The lover fueled that illusion. He spoke about her the way someone talks about an award, not a partner. He referred to their future as proof of his superiority. According to him, I had been a stepping stone, a temporary chapter, a lesson she needed to escape. His vocabulary was filled with declarations of triumph. He praised himself for freeing her from mediocrity, while ignoring the irony that everything he used to build this fantasy came from the man he dismissed. What they miscalculated was simple. Silence does not equal surrender. A quiet man is not harmless. He is focused. They believed knowledge belonged to the loudest voice. They forgot that documents speak louder than imaginations. They never considered the legal reality in which we lived. They planned a wedding for a woman who was still legally my wife, using assets still legally under my protection. Their fantasy relied on my ignorance. My awareness transformed it into evidence. Evidence does not shout. It waits. As I observed each piece fall into place, I felt neither jealousy nor despair. What I felt was clarity. They were not building a life. They were constructing a stage. And stages collapse when the supporting beams are removed. I did not need to stop their wedding. All I needed was to let it continue. Plans built on lies do not end with ceremonies. They end with consequences. And I was about to let consequences speak for me. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. People believe that if you are not shouting, you are surrendering. They do not realize silence is a room where strategies grow. After discovering the extent of their plans, I did not complain, confront, or question. I removed myself from the script they were writing. Not physically at first, but mentally. I stopped giving reactions, opinions, or explanations. I became present without being available. It was the first time in my life I understood how powerful absence can be while still standing in the same space. My wife tried to provoke a response at the beginning. She would ask where I was going, why I was quiet, if I was upset. The tone was not concerned. It was irritated, like someone upset that a character in her story forgot his lines. I answered with a smile, the kind that offered no information. She could not read it. That smile was not an apology. It was a lock. The more she searched for the key, the harder she realized the door wasn't stuck. It had been removed entirely. I started leaving the house early and returning late. I would sit in silence during meals and give short nods instead of sentences. I ignored the subtle invitations to argue. Arguments feed those who need chaos to feel important. I refused to provide the fuel. The man she thought she controlled was no longer performing his role. Her lover expected confrontation, insults, maybe even a desperate plea. What he received was nothing. I watched from a distance how my calm dismantled their confidence. People who lie rehearse reactions. They practice answers, prepare excuses, and imagine victory. They do not prepare for silence. Silence forces them to face themselves without distraction. My lack of response was not an escape. It was a mirror. Every time they looked at it, they saw the instability they tried so hard to hide. They expected a war. I delivered a void. And nothing frightens guilty people more than a void they cannot fill. Days turned into weeks. My absence became louder than any confrontation. I stopped attending family gatherings. I stopped replying to relatives who asked if I was well. I canceled unnecessary conversations. I minimized my presence until it became a shadow moving through the house. A shadow is not threatening, but it is unsettling. It forces others to question where light will fall next. One evening, I watched my wife pacing around the living room, pretending to look for something. She was not searching for an object. She was searching for certainty. She could not find it. The pedestal she once stood on began to shake. The man she believed was harmless no longer reacted to her existence. Her lover noticed a shift. His messages increased. He asked if I suspected anything, if I mentioned lawyers, if I followed them. My silence became the reason they whispered. The more I said nothing, the more they imagined everything. Silence became my language, and preparation my purpose. I reviewed documents, consulted professionals, organized evidence, and mapped my next steps. All of it was done without a raised voice, without sudden movements. I learned that when someone assumes your defeat, every calm action feels like a threat. I was no longer part of their story. I was becoming the author of mine. The most revealing moment came when she approached me one night and asked if I still loved her. Not because she wanted the answer, but because she needed reassurance that her plans were safe. I looked at her without anger, without sadness, and spoke the simplest truth I could manage. I told her love does not disappear. It evolves. In her eyes, I saw something more powerful than guilt. I saw fear, not of losing me, but of losing control. That was the night I understood silence is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of power, and my silence had become the loudest thing in their lives. Silence gave me something I had not enjoyed in years, time to think. Real thinking, not reacting. I used those quiet hours to look not only at what my wife and her lover were doing, but at the structure that held our marriage together. People build fantasies, assuming the foundation beneath them will always remain intact. They danced on a floor they thought belonged to them. They never checked who laid the tiles. One morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer recommended by a colleague. I walked into his office with a simple goal: understand exactly where I stood. I was not seeking revenge. I wanted clarity. He listened carefully, asked detailed questions, and took notes. Then he asked for every document related to our marriage, joint accounts, property acquisitions, and financial agreements. He insisted that most battles are not about emotions, but paper. Paper does not lie, forget, or get seduced. The following week, I returned with a stack of documents I never expected to matter. Among them was a file from the early years of our marriage when we bought our first investment property. At the time, I signed everything without hesitation because I believed marriage was a shared vision. My wife signed as well, barely glancing at the clauses. She had been impatient that day, eager to go shopping. I remembered it clearly. I never imagined that moment would become the hinge on which her future dreams would crumble. The lawyer pointed at the agreement and tapped a sentence that looked ordinary, but carried the weight of a storm. It stated that any financial venture initiated or supported within the marriage was jointly owned, regardless of whose name appeared on the purchase or transaction. More importantly, the agreement granted me legal oversight over shared assets if one party acted without the other's knowledge. In plain terms, every cent she moved toward her secret life was still legally mine to reclaim. I sat still as he explained it. My wife had funded her escape plan with money tied to my rights. The house she rented for her lover, the designer gown, the venue deposit, the imported flowers, and the payments disguised as consulting fees were not just immoral choices. They were investments made on ground she did not own. Her wedding was being constructed with bricks taken from my future. My silence was no longer a shield. It had become a vault. The lawyer leaned back and asked if I wanted to pursue action. I did not react. I simply asked for the process. He outlined a strategy that required no confrontations, no emotional scenes, and no raised voices. All I needed to do was authorize legal notifications at the correct time, and the machinery would run itself. The law does not shout. It waits with patience that fear cannot outrun. Another lawyer joined the case, specializing in matrimonial financial irregularities. Together, they revealed something more damaging than betrayal. They showed me how intertwined our financial lives were. My wife believed she could cut me out like a chapter she no longer wished to read. She forgot that money remembers every signature. Forgotten signatures are silent witnesses. Their fantasy relied on appearances, a dress, a venue, rehearsed promises, and a story where I was the ghost. Yet every piece of that fantasy left a trace. The legal clause transformed those traces into chains. Her lover knew nothing about it. He celebrated a victory financed by the very man he dismissed. I wonder how he would react when he learned he had been bragging while standing on land owned by someone else. I walked out of the office lighter than I entered. I understood something essential. True power does not arrive when you raise your voice. It arrives when you discover the rules others forgot to study. They believed I was irrelevant. They never imagined I was the only person who could legally decide whether their dream would live or collapse. Knowledge became the quiet engine of my next step. They thought they were building a future. They were building evidence. And evidence does not forgive ignorance. He always wanted showdown. Men like him crave an audience, a place to display their confidence as if dominance were a sport. I never gave him that satisfaction. I ignored his messages, avoided his traps, and refused to let him taste the thrill of rivalry. My silence became his obsession. He needed validation. He needed me to react. When men build their identity on intimidation, a quiet opponent feels like an insult. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving the gym, my mind clear after a long workout, when he appeared near my car. His arms were crossed. His stance widened as if preparing for a scene he had rehearsed in front of mirrors. He wore that same smirk I had seen the first night, the one that suggested he believed life owed him victories. He blocked my path, waiting for fear to show up on my face. Fear did not come. Stillness did. He started talking loudly, as if volume could replace intelligence. He asked if I finally understood that my wife chose a better man. He made comments about upgrades and evolution, repeating phrases that sounded memorized. I listened without interruption. I did not blink. My calm irritated him. He expected shouting, trembling, an apology, something that would affirm his fantasy. He did not know that calmness is not emptiness. It is control. When he paused, waiting for my reaction, I spoke. My voice was steady, my tone as neutral as a bank report. I began listing dates. His expression shifted. I mentioned transfers from my wife's account to his. The smirk faded. I brought up the hidden rental property. His shoulders tensed. The collapse did not arrive with shouting or confrontation. It arrived through envelopes, signatures, and silence. 1 week before their carefully orchestrated ceremony, a legal notification reached the venue manager. It was not dramatic. It did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It simply requested an immediate suspension of all events associated with my wife's name until the financial irregularities tied to her transactions were clarified. That single document was enough to paralyze every moving part of their celebration. The manager contacted her first. His tone was different from the enthusiastic voice I had heard when I pretended to be a guest. His words were cautious now, the way people speak when uncertainty replaces admiration. He informed her that the event could not proceed until the financial review was completed. She did not understand. She insisted there must be a misunderstanding. The manager sent her a copy of the notice. Confusion turned into silence. She called her lover. I did not need to hear the conversation to know how it went. His voice, once confident and triumphant, was reduced to irritation. He assumed it was an administrative error. He promised to handle it. He believed energy alone could solve what paperwork had already sealed. But the law does not negotiate with ego. It waits with patience sharper than any weapon. The next day, the boutique received a similar notification. The dress that symbolized her new beginning suddenly became evidence of unauthorized spending. Payments she thought belonged to her new life were frozen under my authority. The floors called, followed by the orchestra. Each phone call chipped away at the fantasy they had sculpted so meticulously. What once looked like destiny now resembled a debt collection campaign. The lover tried to confront the system. He visited the venue personally, demanding exceptions. He spoke of love, commitment, and future plans. The manager listened politely, but pointed to the notice. Legal language has no emotion. It does not care who loves whom. It cares who owns what. The lover tried to negotiate. You cannot negotiate ownership you never had. Meanwhile, my wife sat surrounded by files she did not remember signing. She stared at numbers she had never bothered to understand. For years, she lived comfortably inside the marriage, convinced that decisions were burdens I was meant to carry. That comfort blinded her from recognizing that comfort itself was built on contracts. Contracts she never read. Clauses she never respected. She thought she could remove me from her life like a chapter in a book. She forgot I was the copyright. The town felt the vibrations of the crash before understanding its origin. A week earlier, she walked around with a glow that suggested superiority. Now, the same people avoided her eyes. Some pitied her. Some smiled quietly, reminded that arrogance always has an expiration date. The admiration she once demanded had evaporated. In its place stood curiosity, judgment, and whispers. The lover attempted one final move. He called me, not with insults or bravado, but with a tone cracked by panic. He asked for a meeting. He said there must be another way. I answered calmly, telling him there was no conflict. I reminded him that everything unfolding was the direct consequence of decisions they made while assuming I was irrelevant. He wanted permission to continue. Life had already given him an answer. I never raised my voice. I never asked for justice. I simply let the laws they ignored speak. They believed revenge required confrontation. They never imagined revenge could look like paperwork. The system I put in motion had no anger. It carried facts, signatures, and dates. A foundation they built dreams on without understanding who owned the land beneath them. The day their wedding plans died, I realized something profound. You do not destroy people who betray you. You remove yourself, and their decisions do the rest. Their future did not collapse because I interfered. It collapsed because it was not theirs to build. Some crashes are not loud. They are precise. And when they happen, the silence afterward is louder than any celebration could ever be. The day she finally looked at me did not arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, like a realization that comes too late. The house, once filled with her certainty, felt smaller. Her confidence had evaporated. Papers, notices, and unanswered calls surrounded her. She moved slowly, as if each step required permission from a future that no longer existed. I sat in the living room reading, not pretending to be calm, but simply existing. I had no performance left to give. My silence was no longer a strategy. It was my reality. She stood in the doorway for several minutes, gathering courage. The woman who once believed she could reshape destiny now struggled to form a single sentence. Her eyes were red, not from pain, but from disbelief that life had dared to continue without her consent. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. She wanted to talk. She expected confrontation, tears, maybe accusations. She expected the man she once dismissed, the one who reacted, the one who explained himself, the one who tried to fix what she broke. He no longer lived here. She asked if I hated her. Hatred requires energy. I had none to spare. I did not avoid her eyes. I simply waited. She searched my face for anger, for injury, for proof that she still mattered. All she found was calm. My indifference unsettled her more than any insult could have. Nothing is more frightening than discovering you injured someone who no longer bleeds. She began with apologies. They were elaborate, crafted like speeches meant for an audience. She spoke of misunderstandings, confusion, emotional storms. She tried to rewrite her actions as accidents. Each word attempted to pull me back into a role I no longer played. I listened without interrupting. I did not nod. I did not soften. Her apologies floated in the air and disappeared, unanswered. An apology has value only when delivered to someone who seeks resolution. I did not need resolution. I had closure. When apologies failed, she reached for nostalgia. She spoke of the early days, of promises we once made, of dreams we once shared. Her voice softened, hoping memory would reopen doors she had locked herself. She waited for recognition, for a sign that memories still had power. Memories do not guide a man who has outgrown the reason he built them. Her tone shifted. Tears followed. They rolled down her face like confessions she believed would cleanse her. She waited again. Tears can manipulate only those who fear losing something. I had nothing left to lose. She mistook silence for cruelty. It was not cruelty. It was distance. A man cannot return to a place that no longer fits him. She asked if there was someone else. She needed a reason that made sense to her ego. People who betray cannot understand that someone may leave them without another destination. They assume replacement, not transformation. I did not answer. Truth does not owe explanations. Her face changed as understanding finally arrived. She looked at me not as a husband, not as a victim, but as someone beyond her reach. For the first time, she saw the cost of her decisions. She realized betrayal does not always end in shouting or heartbreak. Sometimes it ends in irrelevance. That is the punishment she never anticipated. She sat down, defeated, no longer performing. She asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted peace. Not with her, with myself. She looked at me with the expression of someone who realizes a bridge has burned without flames, without smoke, without witnesses. It simply no longer exists. In that moment, she understood something that arrived far too late. Love ends loudly. Self-respect ends silently. And nothing is more painful than discovering the person you destroyed stopped needing you long before you noticed them leaving. She did not lose a husband that day. She lost an audience. And a woman without an audience loses the story she tried so hard to control. Endings are rarely loud. They arrive like evenings, not storms. People expect explosions, shouting, breaking points. None of that happened. I did not ruin anything. I did not chase anyone. I did not expose her publicly. I simply stepped aside and allowed the weight of her own choices to fall where they were always destined to land. That was enough. Reality does not rush. It waits, and when it arrives, it does so with precision. The lover was the first to disappear. The confident gestures, the rehearsed smirk, the proclamations of a superior future all evaporated when responsibility knocked on his door. Love spoken loudly becomes silent when bills arrive. He stopped answering her calls, stopped sending messages, and vanished as if he had never existed. The man who once introduced himself like a prize now slipped away like a rumor. He did not leave a farewell message. He did not offer explanations. He simply abandoned her the moment her dream demanded real-life obligations. For someone who believed he deserved everything, he left without taking anything, not even accountability. The wedding dissolved without ceremony. One cancellation led to another until every thread of her new beginning unraveled in her hands. The boutique released her dress from its hold. The venue reclaimed its date. The orchestra removed her name from their schedule. The florist discarded and used orchids. What once felt inevitable became embarrassing. Invitations that once symbolized ascension now represented a fall. Some guests mailed their regrets. Others did not bother. Silence answered where pride once stood. She tried to salvage something from the wreckage. She reached out to friends who had applauded her decision, expecting sympathy. She found distance instead. People admire rebellion only when it succeeds. Failure makes supporters invisible. Some avoided her. Others pretended not to have known anything. The whispers that once fed her confidence returned as questions no one wanted to answer. Betrayal unites people only until consequences arrive. After that, loyalty dissolves. For the first time, she saw the cost of a fantasy she thought she could afford. Legal notices continued to arrive. Payments demanded attention. Debts outlined her decisions in numbers she never imagined would matter. She stood alone in a reality she constructed without understanding its price. She did not lose a wedding. She lost the audience for whom she built her performance. I remained calm. People expected anger, perhaps triumph. I felt neither. I did not watch her crumble to celebrate. I watched to confirm something I had learned through pain. Dignity is not a reaction. It is a choice. She believed she could hurt me by replacing me. She misunderstood. You cannot replace someone who grew beyond the space you abandoned. She thought the end of us would be the end of me. It became the beginning of someone she never truly saw. We eventually met at the table we once shared, not as a couple, but as two people who lived different versions of the same story. She looked at me with something far heavier than regret. Regret wishes time could rewind. Her expression wished time could erase. She apologized again, but apologies do not rebuild what has already been dismantled. Trust cannot be glued together. It either stands whole or stands nowhere. She did not ask for another chance. She asked for understanding. I gave her silence. Not punishment, not cruelty. Silence. Some truths are not meant to be spoken. They are meant to be lived. She looked at me and understood without explanation that forgiveness does not guarantee return. Healing does not require reunion. Love does not always need a second act. I walked away with peace, not victory. She remained with memories, not a future. She did not lose a husband. She lost the only man who would have stayed when life became imperfect. That truth will follow her longer than any legal notice, any debt, or any rumor. Revenge burns quickly. Dignity burns forever.